Hamilton, a musical that is very well known. If you are from the US, you know it well. Chances are you spent a lot of money to go and see it because it was all the craze. Recently, it was put out on Disney Plus, and people have been watching it more and more, and so we finally were able to watch it. And it's about a man named Alexander Hamilton. Right? He's a founding father, statesman, politician, military commander. And one of the theme songs of Hamilton is My Shot, right? You know of it? You know of it? Yeah, you know of it? And he says, I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. I'm not throwing away my shot. And that song continues on throughout the musical, helping us understand that Alexander Hamilton is a man that doesn't want to miss the moment. He's a man who has a vision of what a country should be like. He has a vision of what freedom is and how important freedom is. And so his whole life, whether he was in the military or he studied law or in Congress or creating the Constitution, through all of it, the whole theme is I'm going to work harder than anyone else so that when the moment comes, I'm not going to give away, I'm not going to miss my shot. And what we would call that is that moment of truth. It's that moment in life when you have to make a decision. It's that moment in life when all the opportunity is given to you and you seize it, you take it, and often when that happens, it defines your life, it defines your trajectory of where you will be, right? And many of us have an idea of that. We had moments like that, maybe in high school, maybe in college. It was at a game. It was at a club. It was at a moment when you made a decision and everything else in your life was now shaped from that. And for Esther, this is her shot. This is her moment of truth. And that's a question that is in front of us today. In that moment of truth, will you be ready? How can you be ready when you have that moment in front of you? And like Hamilton, like Esther, you don't give it away. You recognize the life that you have. You recognize the opportunities given to you, and you don't let it pass by. That's the big idea. The idea is that moment of truth, that moment where you're given that shot. And so here in Esther 4, we see that so much of it is understanding the situation. It's understanding the truth of the situation, the importance of truth. Ask your neighbor, can you handle the truth? This is what we do here. We engage a little bit. Ask your neighbor, can you handle the truth? Can you handle the truth? If you're online, feel free to type in, can you handle the truth? And because let me share with you the backstory of where we are. I know that not everyone was here in the month of June as we went through Esther. The Persian Empire was potentially the most powerful empire that was ever created. And King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, was the king. And he had a 6-month-long exhibition, parade for military purposes. And in that, he had a time where he wanted to end it with this grand party. And he wanted his wife Vashti to come out and to display to all the people how beautiful she was. And she stands up to him and says, I'm not going to flaunt myself around your drunk friends. And so she says, no. And he says, okay, bye-bye, nice knowing you. Chapter 2. They do this huge survey of the land, looking for all the young, beautiful women, young, beautiful virgins specifically, to see who would be capable to be the next queen. And so Xerxes has the pick of the litter. Whoever he wants, he can choose. And Esther is chosen. And in this, there's so much confusion. So much confusion as the reader, because you're trying to figure out, Esther, I thought Esther was this godly, honorable woman of, full of integrity. And what you see in chapter 2 is that as she is taken, she does not say no to the king. She spends a night with the king. Not sure what she does. You could use your imagination. Wins him over and becomes a queen. That's Esther. And what the lesson that we learned at that time is you may be in a less than ideal situation, but you are exactly where God wants you to be. Because God is not mentioned anywhere in the book, but what we see so clearly is that though there's not one active miracle, the whole thing is a miracle. God's hand is everywhere. And the idea is, if God is not explicit in the text, can you see him? I think we do, even through their imperfect decisions. And so with this choice that Esther makes to become the queen, to give herself to this pagan man, the author also has no comment, no judgment, nothing. Doesn't say good or bad about her actions. And so for us, as the reader, you're forced to try to think through, is this good? Is this bad? What is going on? But the only thing that we see clearly is that things aren't neat and tidy, right? Things aren't Sunday school. You learned how you should live in Sunday school. You should not sin, obey your parents, do the 10 Commandments, obey Jesus, love Jesus, believe in Jesus. And then when you go out into the real world, you're put into a situation where it seems like every decision is a mixture of good and bad. To do this is good and bad. To do that is good and bad. And you're thinking, what do I do? And so in that moment, we learned that God sovereignly works through ambiguous circumstances and imperfect decisions, right? Ambiguous circumstances. You don't know which way is right. Every decision is mixed with good and bad. You do the best that you can. You carry out his perfect plan of redemption. And that's what we see. Through all their imperfect decisions in these ambiguous situations, they live, it seems like probably assuming the best of them, with their best intentions, and through it, they're in this predicament now, right? Where in chapter 3, as I mentioned right before, that Haman is put second in charge. And Haman is an Agagite. Can you say Agagite? Agagite, right? It just sounds wrong. Agagite. He's an Agagite. And if you know Old Testament history, Agagites and Jews don't like each other. And because they don't like each other, this tells us a lot. Specifically, the few times that the author does make comment, it's with Haman. For example, in 3:10, if you look there, it says, Haman, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the little that the author comments on tells us a lot. That there are people that don't like believers. It just is. This is not necessarily ethnic or racial, though it is. It's so much more than that. It is spiritual. That for whatever reason, whether it's sin or Satan, whether it's a misunderstanding of the faith, there are people that will always misunderstand or have animosity against the church, Christians. And that's what we see. And so, as Haman is put in charge, he wants everyone to simply bow. Not worship, but bow. Like in Korea, when you see a Korean, and the tradition is you bow, you insa, right? And that's the idea. And so as everybody bows and as Haman walks in, there's Mordecai, standing out like a sore thumb, right? As everybody, and just imagine everybody bows, and then there's this one guy that's just like, not bowing. And then even that, you wonder, Mordecai, you're going to stand up for your faith now? Why not stand up for your faith when you're giving Esther some wisdom about how she should live? Mordecai, aren't you the one that told Esther to keep her faith silent? Her ethnicity silent? And it's in this moment where it seems like he may have some good intentions, that he wants to keep his integrity before God. It also seems like there's this tension. He does not like Haman. And so maybe his pride, maybe some goodness within him, he does not bow. And do you see the circumstance that we're in chapter 4? Because of that act of rebellion, now all of the Jews in all the land of Persia, about 15 million Jews, they say, will be put to death on one day because of Mordecai. And that's where we pick up. The importance of understanding the situation, specifically understanding the truth of every situation. So in verse 1, Mordecai learned all that he did. This is chapter 4. Open up your Bibles if you closed it. Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud, bitter cry, like, ah, right? It's very clear Mordecai is not happy. He was silent for so long, and now there's this turn, this change of his mood, his attitude. He went up to the entrance of the gate. He doesn't do this at home. He doesn't do it outside his home. He goes to the entrance of the gate, for no one was allowed to enter into the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. So he goes as far as he can to royalty. That's the idea. He goes as far as he can to show how angry and how upset he is, how much he is grieving. But notice there is no mention of prayer. Do you see that? It should say something like he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and prayed and repented. But it does not say that. So now you have to be thinking, what's going on? Is it spiritual? Because what we know from his history is that Persians did the same thing. They also lamented in similar way, tearing their clothes. This was actually how the culture would lament. And then we see that it's not just Mordecai. In verse 3, in every province, wherever the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So all of them, thinking about 15 million people spread throughout that land, are mourning. And I'm sure as Haman sees this, he's thinking, I've been put into this position of power so that I can finally wipe them out. I hate those God-fearers. And what you see in verse 4 is almost comical. Everybody knows what's going on. Verse 4, Esther's young woman and her eunuchs came and told her, and Queen was deeply distressed, thinking, oh no, why are all these people, why are all the Jews in agony? Right? Why are they lamenting in this way? She has no idea what's going on. So what does she do? Like any politician would, she sends garments to Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, and he would not accept them. All she wants to do is stop the crying. Sounds like politics, right? And then in verses 5 through 9, we see what happens. Esther has Hathach, right, one of her servants, to go out to figure out, why is he acting like this? So now she's getting at the problem. And this is Mordecai's intention. He wants to talk to her. If you don't know the backstory, Mordecai is Esther's cousin. Then Mordecai had adopted Esther to take care of her because she was an orphan. They're close. They're very close. And so Hathach is appointed. He goes to Mordecai, learns of everything, and Mordecai tells her everything, it says. Right? Everything that's going on. The edict to kill all the Jews in one day. The amount of money Haman put out there so that this would happen for sure. It was a large sum of money. Some say half the taxes of the land. Some others say 2/3 of the net income of Persia. It's a huge amount of money this man has put into, invested in, so that the Jews would be annihilated. And then listen to how he ends it in verse 8. He says in verse 8, he gives us a copy of the decree in Susa that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. Do you see that? On behalf of her people. Not on behalf of my people, not on behalf of the Jews, on behalf of her people. He's saying, Esther, it's time. It's time to not be silent anymore. We can't hide anymore. Esther, it's time that you let people know that you are a Jew, that you are a God-fearer. Imagine if that's you. You receive that. You're thinking, wait. So the situation is that Haman wants to kill all the Jews, and then you want me to tell the king that I'm a Jew? What do you think she says? It's a tense moment. You could sense that for Esther, her hands are sweaty, right? There's that lump in her throat. She could probably feel and hear her heartbeat. Verse 10, then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, and this is now what she says. Essentially, it's no, and gives a solid reason. Right? Verse 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. There is only one law in terms of how to approach the king, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come to the king these 30 days. And so he gives the king a pretty solid reason, right? Hey, Mordecai, I don't want to go to the king because no one can go to the king. And if anyone just goes to the king, him just by a movement of the scepter can say, you're not welcome, you die. And then she shares this tidbit, right? This little piece of information saying, and by the way, the king, my husband, we haven't seen each other for 30 days. Wink, wink. Do you understand it? Telling him, Mordecai, I know you're my adopted, or I'm your adopted daughter. I know we don't probably talk about this stuff too much, but he's not practicing purity, by the way. There's a whole harem. Who am I? Though I'm the queen, he's not interested in me anymore. We've been married 5 years. He hasn't seen me in 30 days. So how does Mordecai respond? Oh, my daughter. Yeah, I don't want to put your life at risk, right? Verse 12, and Mordecai told Esther and said, verse 13, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. He's telling all truth, right? And nothing but the truth at this point. There is no hiding anymore. You can't continue to run away from truth. He is saying, and some commentators actually think this might even be a threat. That's how blatant he is, saying that, Esther, if you stay silent, don't think you will escape. Somehow, some way, you will be found out. Telling her, you can't run away from the truth. You can lie to yourself all you want. You can lie to everyone else all that you want. You can lie to God all you want. But at one point, truth will be found out. But remind you, 5 years in, no one knows that she's a Jew. No one. No one knows that she's a Jew. That's why she doesn't know of what this edict, this edict of annihilating all the Jews have been sent out. She's been living a lie, and she's been living a comfortable life. But the lesson is, you can only run away from truth for so long. But when you do, you can only run away from truth for so long before you end up in misery. And that's the truth. You may be living some sort of lie. And some nights you have a good night's sleep, and other nights you don't. Because as much as you want to lie to yourself about whatever that thing is, the heart knows what truth is. And when you look into the news, you realize there's a lot of misery in a lot of different places. Right? 2020 has been crazy, right? 2020 has been crazy. It's been crazy. Who knew? Who knew? We prayed for so many things for 2020. We should have prayed for simply no virus. It's in chaos, right? COVID. Chaos. Not just because of the virus, not just because we have to quarantine, not just because we have to social distance, not just because there's no more socialization anymore, but because of the mass amounts of misinformation, right? Wasn't it so frustrating? I mean, I was here in Korea, watching the news in the US, hearing doctors say masks aren't important. I'm like, I'm not a doctor, but it seems helpful when you don't spread germs, right? Now it's hear this over and over and over. So I start to question, maybe masks are just a Korean thing, and maybe it's one of those Korean myths that we all believe. All right, the misinformation. And isn't that what leads to chaos, to debates, to heated debates, to tension? COVID, racism, right? When everything kind of broke out in the US, we did a whole thing here to talk about our stance on racism, that we believe every man, every woman is created equal in the image of God. Right? We had two of our sisters share their own story a bit and share their own wisdom. But since then, there's so much more misinformation or information to the point where I'm more confused than ever about what is racism. Standing against racism, but more and more confused. Why? Because of the misinformation. And politics. I mean, I don't have to even get into politics, right? The mass amounts of misinformation that is out there. You know what the word that the Oxford Dictionary put out in 2016? They put out a word of the year. In 2016, the word of the year was post-truth. Isn't that interesting? And this is what post-truth is. It's an adjective defined as relating or denoting circumstances which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. It's like, didn't see that in 2016. But they were seeing the trends. They were noticing this idea of truth being secondary, less influential to shape the public opinion, and using emotion and personal beliefs for their personal agenda, which is more and more why we're trying to figure out which news platform should I listen to. Because you start to realize everybody has an agenda, right? So since 2016, there's this graph that shows that since 2015, the amount of times post-truth has been used. And we live in a society where more and more truth is devalued. People are sharing their simple opinions, facts that may be skewed. And what do we have today? More confusion, more frustration, more tension, more despair, more misery. Truth is vital. I know that we live in a postmodern generation, but it's only a matter of time till the pendulum has swung to being not valuing truth. At one point, it's probably going to swing way back to become a fundamentalist society again. But that's the idea. And what we see Esther hearing from Mordecai is not sentiment of it's going to be okay. No, he tells her hard truth. As the one who has adopted her, who loves her, he knows what she needs to hear at this point. Long enough have we lied to ourselves and lied to others. It is time to face the truth. It's the importance of it. But then, when you come to that realization how important it is, it's always a little bit scary to face truth, to struggle for truth. As we see the importance of it, what you will find in your journey to understand the truth of everything is that it's a struggle. That truth, at first, it hurts. Tell your neighbor truth hurts. Truth hurts. It's that moment when they face this reality. They can't run away from it, that one day all the Jews, all of God's people might be annihilated. And it's in that moment in life and death when you start to realize what you truly believe. That's what C.S. Lewis says. You never know how much you believe anything until it's truth or false, so it becomes a matter of life and death. And for Esther and Mordecai, it seems like they were some sort of God-fearers, but not truly living it out, living some sort of double life or a lie. And in that moment, when they realize their faith matters, in that moment of life and death, the little bit of faith that they have, it comes out. In church, that's good news, because that's all you need. Just a itty-bitty little faith. That's what Jesus says, right? Faith as small as a mustard seed can move a mountain. Because it's not about how big your faith is, it's about who you have faith in. If you have any understanding of God, if you have any small little walk with God, as you continue to nurture that, what happens is God in His grace and mercy floods you, encounters you, sometimes chases after you, sometimes puts you in situations where you have to face truth. And that's what we see. And first, it's bad truth. That's how often it is in the spiritual world. First, it's bad truth, and then the Bible gives you the good truth. And the good truth is not good truth until the bad truth is bad. And that's what Mordecai is doing. Saying, Esther, the situation is everyone might die. All our people might die. And you might die. But then this is the good truth. Verse 13, do not think for yourself that the king's palace that you will escape. Verse 14, for if you keep silent at this time, listen to these words. Relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. The truth of it is God will be faithful to His people, even if Esther is not faithful to her people. That's what he is saying, that God will be faithful. And he knows the covenant promises of God. And so he knows that although Esther is put into a situation in a time, for such a time as this, to save the people, he has faith in God, knowing that God will somehow, some way, always work it out for His people. And that's the truth that she needed to hear. Relief and deliverance will rise. That's how committed God is to our people. But remind you, your obedience still matters, which is why she says, but you and your father's house will perish. The idea is God's sovereignty and our obedience is all filled in this one verse, saying how important it is that you understand God's covenant promise. He loves His people, but you also better understand that your obedience matters. It does not nullify our obedience. If anything, it heightens it, because we understand that God is good. He has a plan. For who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And this is the crazy idea that he is telling her. Just maybe, Esther, despite all our mistakes, despite all our circumstances, God is still present and in control, orchestrating all things through our obedience according to His great plan of redemption. That is the good news. The bad news, you have mistakes. You have ambiguous and challenging circumstances. Sometimes you make the wrong choices. But the good news is God is still present. Though you can't see Him, He is still present. The unseen God can be seen when you have that moment, that heart of faith. He's present, He's in control, working all things out, right? Everything through our little obedience. Someone once said, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that's the truth. It's a struggle. You've heard of Christianity, that the whole doctrine is you are sinners. That's an offensive message, right? You're a sinner. Tell your neighbor you're a sinner, right? And the idea of that is you have taken God off of his throne in your heart and you have put yourself as God. That's essentially what you have done. That's essentially what Adam and Eve did. When they disobeyed, it wasn't simply disobedience. At that point, they decided, God is wrong at this point. I know better. God, remove you, put myself on. What happens? Death, snakes, lies, accusations, misery, misinformation, all a consequence or is sin. And that's the reality. The world that we live in wants to skip over that part and just say, oh, you are loved. Oh, you are beautiful. Girl, right? That's the whole idea. Oh, you're so pretty, right? But the idea is sinners. Acknowledging that, owning that. It's bad news. You think, how does this truth set me free? And it'll piss you off. But with that, you realize this is what I needed. I needed to face truth to then receive the good news. That's the struggle that you will all go through. Whether you decide to become a Christian or you've decided to become a Christian and you're struggling and you haven't told anybody of that one thing. At one point, the truth will come to get you. And lastly, when you do that, there's a power. The power of truth. This is not what happens in, it seems like an instant. My guess is it took her a little bit. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews. This is what Esther said. Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink these 3 days. Now she's, for the first time, not being passive and simply listening. As she's seen the truth, as she has seen that she was put into a time for such as this, as she sees God's sovereignty, despite her disobedience, it changes her heart. And now she is a leader. Now she has courage. No longer is she passive. She is now active. Because now she sees that God is sovereign and she is put into this position. And so she not only listens, now she gives a command. Mordecai, I got you. I hear you. Tell all the Jews for 3 days, don't eat, don't drink, pray for me. What does she say? She says, if I perish, I perish. This woman who hasn't shared her faith, her ethnicity to anybody, right? When she sees the full truth, she can't run away from the truth anymore. She can't lie to herself anymore. She's going to face it. And she also means that by faith, there's a risk. There's always a risk with faith. Yes, God is good. Yes, He knows best. But sometimes it is painful. For some people, they have died for their faith. And none of those people in that moment have said, oh, God is wrong. Oh, I was wrong about God. God is not good. No, for in that moment, they enter into glory. See, that's the truth. And that's what she has seen. God will take care of me. If I perish, I perish. I know that the only thing that matters is now that I understand this, I want to be obedient. You see, this story is not about Esther the heroine, right? It's about Esther, this imperfect Jewish orphan who was adopted, who lied, who lived a comfortable life, lived for herself, is now put into a position where she can't lie anymore. And she sees that despite all her weaknesses and mistakes, that God is still present and still in control, and God could redeem all her mistakes. And in that moment, God could use her to orchestrate all things through her simple obedience, a great plan of redemption. You see, that's the power of truth. It brings clarity. You now see what's right, you now see what's wrong. Now you stand up for that truth, right? It gives you purpose. It gives you courage. It gives you security. It has re-energized her. That's what the truth does. At first, it's bad, bad news. We still struggle with it. As we allow God to speak in His grace and mercy, you realize, oh, He is so good. He is so good. You see, Esther does not give away her shot. But the way that the world will do it is they'll pump you up and hype you up. The way the Bible will do it is they'll show you the mirror and help you realize you're not that great. You've got a lot of mistakes. But God is faithful. That gives us all hope. We don't all have to be the best of the best. And that, in fact, if you're actually worst of the worst, it actually gives you a head up, a bit of a platform up. Because you recognize how important then God is. She realizes all of this. And when she sees the full picture of God's sovereignty, her obedience, she says, if I perish, I perish. And that is everything. Church, that is everything. It's in that moment you will be able to, not by your own courage, but because you now just see simply what it is, that God is in control, He will use little old you, He will use you. I know we all want 2020 to be over, but let me tell you, I don't think it gets better. I don't. Why? Because we're living in a postmodern, post-truth culture. I believe, and I'm not prophesizing or anything like that, but I think it's going to get harder for a Christian. I think it's going to get harder. I think this pandemic is a test for the believer. I think if you have been faithful, you have seen a little bit of what's in your heart, that you believe, that you'll maybe risk coming out here to worship because you know that it's so, so important. But I also want you to realize this. We have a bigger picture. I do think, in my mind, it gets harder. But I want you to see this. You see, Mordecai needed Esther, a mediator. Someone who will risk her life and through her obedience, save her people. You see, for us, we shouldn't necessarily identify with Esther. We identify with the Jews, saying, oh, we need someone to save us. And this is the beautiful news. That even in Esther's weakness, God used her. How much more so when God sends His Son? And He knows your struggles. He actually came because He knows your struggles. And it's in that understanding you realize not only, although Esther said, if I perish, I perish, what Jesus did, He said, I will perish. I will perish so that they don't have to perish. And when you see that full picture, that Christ goes on that cross for your sin and my sin, and you realize that guarantee that He will be faithful to His promise, doesn't that give you a little bit of courage to say, okay, well, if I get a little mocked tomorrow because of my faith, it's all right, right? Because what? You recognize God's commitment to you, His love for you, that if the worst thing that can happen is you die and you be with Him. And that is the good news. Church, be ready. Whatever happens tomorrow, be ready because you love Jesus today. Let's pray.